Hi guys, today I've got Amelia Lee joining me on the Reno Q&A Show. Amelia's from the Undercover Architect. She's got extensive experience as a builder, renovator and a practicing architect. Listen to Amelia Lee, we talk via Skype. Lots of good content on this one. Hi everyone, we've got a really great episode of the Reno Q&A Show today. We are doing our first one via Skype and I've got the Undercover Architect in the house. Amelia, how are you?
I'm well, Phil. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And I'm really excited about having you on board because I've been following your content for quite some time now. You write up some great blogs, post some great videos, and a lot of your values align really well with our Monster Go-To. When I read that you've got over 20 years experience and you're helping people do things without the heartache, it aligns what our tagline is about making renovations easier, saving people dollars and helping them finish on time with less stress. So it really aligns with us. But look, Amelia, we've had some customers putting questions on the Q&A and you're a qualified architect, but more than just an architect, and not any architect is just an architect, but you obviously had experience in renovating and building. So just give us a bit of a background before I fire into these questions, Amelia, about your experiences in those 20 years of what you've been doing in the renovation game.
By all means, Phil. So yes, I'm a registered architect and I can explain a bit more about what a registered architect means because I believe one of the questions that came in was about that. But I have been in the industry for over 20 years. I've worked predominantly in residential work. So I've done over 250 projects, mostly family homes. I worked for design firms early in my career. I also did some Olympic work in Sydney, some public work there. And then I made the move up to, after being overseas and working in London for a while for an architecture practice, I then made the move up to Brisbane. And so I have worked for a big development company, co-owned my own practice for 5 years, and then started up Undercover Architect a few years ago. So my husband and I've also done 3 renovations of our own. So we had a baby poo renovation. We lived in the houses whilst we were doing the projects. So I think I have a personal and a professional understanding of what renovating and building is really like.
Well, you're here today to tell us about it, so you've done well. You've survived all that. So look, one of the first questions that come up, and this comes up frequently on our Monster Go-To, where people ask us that they're in an existing home, they're looking to do a renovation or an addition, and we're getting a lot more of that, and I'll go into that a bit later. But people ask us, do I need an architect or should I use a draftsperson? And of recent times, we're starting to hear this term about a building designer. And I think there's a bit of confusion out in the renovation world because we see all these shows on TV and we don't appreciate the difference between the skill set and the qualifications. What's the advice that you give to the public that are looking to renovate or build on when they need an architect versus draftsperson versus a building designer?
Yeah, for me, I always tell people they need to find the right designer for them because it's a really personal relationship. You're going to be trusting this person. You're going to be spending a lot of time together, sharing a lot of intimate details about your finances and about what you want for your future home. So you've got to be able to communicate effectively, feel that things are operating transparently and that you're being listened to and worked with collaboratively to realise your dreams. Now, that being said, there are differences between those different industry members. So, and a lot of times that's explained as an education thing. I feel that it's a bit more than that. So for somebody to be an architect, they actually have to be registered as an architect. It doesn't just mean that they've done an architectural degree, but they've also then gone on to do a set period of work experience that is logged and then audited. And then they have to sit a series of exams and pass that in order to be qualified and registered. And that means that they can legally call themselves an architect. And then they have to do continuing professional development each year. Now, if somebody is calling themselves an architect, if they're saying that they're providing architectural services, then legally they have to be a registered architect, and you can check that with the Board of Architects in your state. And it's really important.
Is that as simple as going online?
It is. It's a free service. You can check with them. You know, just recently, actually, the Board of Architects prosecuted a building designer for holding out as an architect. He was telling people he was providing architectural services, and he got fined quite significantly. It's not a criticism of the talent. It's because he was a very good designer. But if you want to use an architect, then you need to know that you're actually using a registered architect. So the difference then is obviously then is building designer, and you can find licensed building designers, which I believe in Victoria and Queensland. They have a licensing system. Other parts of Australia, they don't necessarily. But building designers have usually done a TAFE degree, a TAFE course, in order to become qualified as building designers. And then draftspeople, look, anyone can call themselves a draftsperson. So it's not really something that's regulated. So for me, the biggest difference, and I actually had a colleague explain this really well, is he said he feels that architects provide more of a qualitative service, where building designers will provide a quantitative service. So there's a lot of difference in the way that we're taught about design across those different professions. And I will say upfront, like in any profession, there are those that are great at what they do and those that are terrible at what they do, but still get to hang a shingle and charge people money for it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why it's really important that you check their credentials, you speak to previous clients, you check their references, you understand that their quality of work, you feel a really good connection with them, and you have the opportunity to really check that they're going to be the right fit for you. But architects are really, we spend a lot of time learning how to design. The bulk of an architectural degree is actually learning about the design process and about problem solving in a design sense. So it's very much an interpretive thing. We'll look at a brief, we'll think about the experience, the emotions we might want to, a space to make somebody feel, how we want light to move and create the sense of feeling in a space. It's really about shaping volume and experience and looking at what needs to be done in terms of satisfying functionally what the homeowner wants, but also what's going to elevate their sense of feeling in that home. A building designer, they're more quantitative. So they will definitely look at what you need to put into a home, and they'll put it together. And some building designers are incredibly talented at what they do and can put that together really well and create a fantastic design outcome. It's just a very different process because they're not taught about design the same way that we are. Now, whenever I answer this question, I always inflame someone in the industry. Okay, so this is my personal point of view. You do need to check for yourself. Some councils are very difficult to navigate in terms of satisfying all of the checkboxes that you have to for how you're protecting your neighbour's sunlight, how you're responding to the context or the other types of homes in your area. If you're in a historical area, some of the inner suburbs of Sydney, for example, can be very challenging to get a council approval simply if you don't have somebody who's very experienced working in that area and understands what needs to be done with your home to create the solution that's going to be approvable. So I think in any situation, you look at people who are experienced at working with your type of home, your type of area, doing your type of project, that they meet their projects on budget and on time, that they create great client relationships, that you feel listened, that you can communicate really well with them, and that you can see work that looks like theirs. Now, that looks like what you want to achieve. Now, a draftsperson, all I can say about draftspeople is that they learn how to draw. And in my experience, and from speaking with hundreds of homeowners who've told me this, they feel that they get disappointed because they expect a draftsperson to design and the draftsperson just draws up what they've asked of them. And so for my mind, if you know exactly what you want, then by all means go to a draftsperson and get it drawn up, because it'll probably be the least expensive way. I've seen building designers charge more than architects, so it's not always a fees exercise to compare one with the other. So it's really, you've got to find the right fit for you and see what's going to work for your project. And just, you've got to be really careful, because some members in the industry do get quite aggressive about what they believe the differences are. And like I said, whenever I answer this question, it's always a really contentious response that gets.
But it's your experiences. I mean, you're in a unique situation because you've renovated, you've built, you said you've done 3 with your husband. I think from my experience, my 30 years in the building game, an architect, I always look at engineers and architects differently than building designers and draftsmen, because if I think about something structural, then I'd expect that I go to a professional like an architect or an engineer and they understand all that. And exactly that, draftsperson or a building designer is more the drawings or helping out with the costings and the budget side. But one thing I've seen where people come unstuck is they look at the budget at the start, they want to cut costs, they go and save, they get the draftsperson or the building designer, then they go, shit, we've made a mistake here, we need an architect, and that's going to cost them more than they get stung, because the architect's got to uncover, excuse the pun, but uncover everything that's been done incorrectly and start again, and so they've paid almost twice for it.
Most
so how do they get
yeah.
that piece right? So the people, they've got the passion, they've got their dream book, they know exactly what they want to build. What's that bit of advice you get them to go with the start to ensure they know if they need that architect or that building designer? What's the one or two key things they should ask themselves or get it from someone else to know that?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I think that you have to believe in the value that that person's going to add to your process. I think this is one of the biggest things is people don't know what they don't know when they're building or renovating. And so they put a foot into the water and they make a decision. Renovating or building isn't just one big decision. It's just lots of little sequential decisions, and you can end up very quickly down, 5 or 6 steps down one path and not realize that you had a bunch of options back at the front. So for me, I always try and represent it like a big triangle. You're sitting at the top of a broad point where you're trying to weigh up all of your options and then make decisions that are going to get you to their end. What most people do is they travel it like a diamond. They start at one point, make a decision, and then that's only when they're in the middle that they're realizing all the options that were available to them and all the bad decisions that they made that they then have to undo and then go to the point that they're trying to reach. So as I said, if you're trying to work out, do you need an architect or a building designer, look at what is going to be needed to get approval in your area. If you're living in a historical area, say of Sydney, with big heritage rules on your property, I would always suggest probably that an architect who is experienced at working in your area will be better experienced to navigate you through that process more confidently and do all of the checks and balances at the beginning so that you can mitigate your risk moving through and be more likely to achieve an approval. If you're in a greenfield site where you're building a brand new home and you find a building designer whose work you really, really love, and you feel like you can work with them confidently, then by all means use a building designer. I speak from also, the large development company that I worked in had 100 strong staff in the architectural side of the business when I was there. So we worked with building designers, draftspeople and architects. The building designers I worked with, they'll always say a great architect is better than a great building designer. So because they will expand your sense of what's possible for your home. But if they're an architect that doesn't know how to deliver on budget and a building designer does, then, it's going to be pointless working with the architect because you're going to get your heart broken because you're going to fall in love with this, so you want to make sure that they're also somebody that's going to understand how to deliver on budget. So it's really tricky question to answer, Phil, because it's not really an equivocal yes or no. I would always suggest to people use an architect, but use a great architect who is really experienced, really qualified. Remember too that your life gets created in those lines on that page. That's what actually creates the lifestyle you'll get to lead in your home. People try to hold back the spend so they've got the money to spend on the build. And they forget that the investment in the design is what's actually going to create their lifestyle long term. So I think it's that value perception too. Don't think this is just about getting the bare minimum cost of design possible. That, I've seen people go to building companies where they offer free design services and they get 6-9 months down the track and they realize that the price of the build's rising. They don't own the design, so they can't walk away and get a check price. They have to pay, tens of thousands of dollars to exit that relationship, and it was because they thought the design services were free. So it's really balancing out what does the design mean to you value wise, and if you believe that the design is what makes a difference to how you get to live in your home, then find a really good architect to help you deliver that.
Yeah, our Monster Pros, when we end up talking to clients that want advice on how to find trades, one of the bits of advice we tell them is talk to a few of them. Be transparent with what your vision is, and you get a feel for who you're going to work with and they share your dream. And from what you're saying now, I think that's probably good advice for people even choosing an architect or the building designer to understand and talk to a few people first. Don't just go with the first conversation and then shop around, so to speak, because it is more than, as you said, qualifications. So,
and one of the mistakes people make is they get a designer over and they forget that they're interviewing them for a relationship, and they mine them for ideas about the project. Right. And then they assess them based on the ideas they've mined them for. And if somebody's coming to your home to meet with you and they're just feeling mined for free advice about what you could do with your project, it's not a great way to set up a relationship that shows that you want to do something collaboratively with somebody and the same team. So remember, you're interviewing them as a person that's going to help you deliver your dreams, not as the one who's going to tell you immediately what you have to do for your home, So, and I think that use what you do with those initial consults And I've got there's of course lots of resources on the Undercover Architect website about what to do in that initial meeting with a designer, so that and how to check their fee proposals and those types of things, so that you can make sure you're setting up the relationship right and going with the right person, rather than just the one that you thought came up with the best ideas on the spot when you were asking them for free.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure that question's been answered pretty well there. This one comes up. This one comes up all the time. I'm sure you're getting it these days because the public are more conscious, green friendly, energy conscious of where they will save costs with energy later on. And we hear so much about, from whether we're buying white goods, appliances, to window and door designs. And these days we're seeing in many of the suburbs, particularly in states like Victoria and New South Wales, where land and property is extreme, that people have realised instead of going to buy somewhere else, they've got a property, maybe knock down and build, or extend and create an extension and addition. How do they go about the energy efficiency? This question comes up all the time and it's been very specific. Like, what are the 2 or 3 best hacks to focus on where you're going to make the biggest saving over the next 10 to 15 years on your return?
So when we're talking about extending and renovating, obviously we're dealing with an existing house. And the thing to realise is that energy efficiency can mean quite a few different things. So it's one of those things. We've actually been on the podcast, on the Undercover Architect podcast, we've had a season on a simple guide to a sustainable home, and we're just about to dive into another part of that season. And it's one of these things, these terminology that get thrown around about environmental sustainability or energy efficiency can have so many different definitions. So the biggest thing to be aware of is that the size of your house is going to be the biggest thing that will determine, right up front, what its energy use is going to be in terms of material use, labour use, how it performs over the long term, its maintenance, all of those other aspects of energy efficiency. So, people kind of get carried away when they're building or renovating, and it's kind of we might as well while we're here, or we'll just in case create this just in case space, or, those types of things. The more compact you can create a home, you can still have functional compact homes that are really joyful to live in. So just exercising some restraint in how big you create your extension, then that can be a really key tip to start with, being really careful to think about how you create functional, flexible spaces rather than just more, okay? Right. The second thing is to look at orientation. So a lot of old homes have not been designed with orientation in mind. So orientation is understanding how the sun moves across your site and how you can capitalise on that to access free heating and cooling for your home, so that you don't have to supplement it as much with air conditioning or heating. The heating and cooling costs of a home are generally about 40% of any energy bill. So the more you can reduce that, the better. So it's really looking at how you're going to look at the existing design of the house and the layout of the house. You think a lot of old homes, for example, old Queenslanders, for example, they put all the sort of main living spaces at the front of the house because that's where the street and the public interface was, and the toilets and all the wet areas went on the back because that's where the septic was. Yeah. And it didn't really take into account any orientation aspects. So when we're wanting to create these beautiful indoor-outdoor connections with our backyards and those types of things, we need to understand, okay, where is north? Because creating something that was going to respond to the movement of the sun through that northern orientation, and particularly in the southern hemisphere, and how we're going to keep the heat out of the sun but let the light in during summer, and how we're going to capture as much of that heat and warmth during winter, so that we can minimise our need for artificial heating and cooling. And an extension is a really good opportunity to look at how can you reconfigure existing spaces in the home, as well as what you're extending and where you're extending it, so that you can get that orientation design working really well. Another thing to look at is the new appliances and lighting and those types of things that you might be putting in the home. So we've got fantastic access to energy efficient lighting solutions, low energy use appliances, and we can really look at the overall energy use of our home to minimise that as much as possible. It is possible to design a home that doesn't need air conditioning, and it's just sort of seems to be this approach in Australia in particular that will whack an air conditioner in and that will deal with those climate extremes. But it's a big energy guzzler, and so looking at what you can do to design your house well, and then to have those appliances working well so that you are lowering your energy use overall, and really questioning what you're going to include so that you can keep that energy use of the home down. And then lastly, it would be looking at things like what you do with demolition. Because that's quite an energy intensive area labour wise, and it produces a lot of waste. So construction industry produces a huge amount of waste annually. And there's a lot of really great builders out there who are now, when they're doing demolition, they're doing it very selectively. They're actually pulling apart building materials, looking at what they can recycle, what they can reuse, what they can sell off. And it's a really great opportunity to assess, do you just want to put it all in a skip bin and send it to the tip? Or do you actually want to look at how you can cleverly pull apart your house so it can be useful to someone else, and what you can do to, minimise waste in that regard? So, there's lots more things to consider, but that's probably the big key things that I would look at, particularly with an extension.
You had a client that actually had told me that when they were going through the whole renovation process, he was at work busy ringing trades. His wife had done all that and made $37,000 on stuff they sold through salvage yards, etc. And he was just was giving the big extra hug and kiss on that one, because it was just the fact that had made that money and never expected to have that there. He thought it was going to be a cost to get rid of it, and that's a good one. One of the things that come up though, and I always think about this because I travel regularly with work. In Europe, I remember the story of a German guy I know. He came and saw his sister-in-law in Melbourne, and he said to me, "Phil, I live in the snow in the centre of Germany." He goes, "But God, I never felt so cold when I stayed at my sister's house in Melbourne," because he reckons the way the timber frame homes were, no double glazed windows, window sills and door sills. Are they things we overlook and we think it's a real luxury instead of actually looking at that and how they can control the temperature in terms of using air conditioners?
I'm so excited you brought this up, because what I'm doing at the moment is the next range of podcast episodes I'll be releasing is about passive house. And right. Passive house started in Germany and is much more predominant through Europe than Australians have ever seen. But passive house is a way of building and renovating that creates thermally controlled homes that then improve indoor air quality, the wellness and health of the occupants, completely lower the energy use, and it's something that is becoming a lot more common. So that friend who came out is experienced and used to living in a home that's well insulated, that probably has double or triple glazing, that potentially has a mechanical ventilation system that then controls the amount of air interchange between inside and outside, and that is airtight so that the home doesn't leak and let out all of that heat that the homeowner might be putting in and just let it go out into the environment. So it's something in Australia that we've really not jumped on the bandwagon of too much, because we're under the impression that we live in this very mild climate, but we still have locations in Australia that have extremes between their summers and their winters, and I can see that this is going to be something that's going to be incorporated a lot more. And it's also the whole passive house process, from a design point of view, actually enables you to model the energy use of a home in an incredibly detailed fashion, to the point of how much energy and heat is an occupant putting out, how much heat waste is coming off the hot water running through pipes works, so that you can see what that then does for your need for cooling and heating in the home, and what you'll then do in terms of your installation needs and your mechanical ventilation. And so there's this whole kind of ability to predictively determine the performance of your home before you build. And then the building process itself, when you're working with passive house certified builders and tradespeople, is that they have to do an auditing process that demonstrates they are building it exactly to that modelling method. They have to do a blower test where they literally put a fan in the door and they demonstrate that the home is airtight. And then if you're getting a passive house certification, you get a certificate at the end that gets audited internationally. So in terms of you being sure that you're getting what you're paying for, it's a fantastic process. And I can see that it's going to be something that, as people understand it more, it's seen as sort of this scientific kind of out there idea, but as people start to understand that it actually works off some pretty basic pragmatics about, thermal control, managing that air exchange between inside and outside. Our windows are ridiculously inefficient in terms of how much heat they allow in and out of our home, how much cold they allow in and out of our home. And I actually had Tracy Gramlich, who's the CEO of the Australian Window Association, on the podcast recently, and she was saying double glazing should just be a standard, because it gives our windows a chance to perform like a wall, So, and then it's also looking at the air tightness and making sure that we don't have lots of air leaks. The challenge with renovating and extending is that you're usually dealing with very leaky old homes, timber frame homes that don't perform well thermally, but it's not out of the question to be able to renovate them in that improves their efficiency. And there are lots more examples coming up of homeowners who've taken this on board and educated themselves on what's necessary, and as a result have created homes that cost very, very little to run, are comfortable year round, and they are able to not only feel like they're doing something for the planet, but it's helping their hip pocket as well. So yeah, I'm really excited about what I can see happening in the future, because I feel as Australians, we're a bit behind. They're doing a lot overseas. America's much better at this with building science. Europe's done it much better. And I think that as we start to, particularly as homeowners become educated about how important this is, and they're seeing their electricity bills going up and up, they're going to start demanding it a lot better. And then that's when we start tipping the scale of that supply and demand equation that then brings down the cost of all of these items, so that they can become much more affordable for mainstream building and renovating.
So you mentioned before, it's not a focus point for Australians to build this way or be focused on it, but those that might be watching this Q&A show, if they have got the thought, okay, I want to look at double glazed windows, I want to look at the extra door sills and window sills, is it, going back to what we said earlier, is this a discussion they should be having with their builder once they've selected that, or if they're doing it themselves, having the design stage with the architect? Because it might not be raised with the architect they choose or the builder they select at that point, but it's an addition they want to ask the question on, and it's a valid one, because at the end of the day, you might build a quality home, but you've got to live in it for 10 or 15 years. Or from a resale value point of view, we know there are more astute buyers out there that will look at that. So when you are selling, if you've got a double glazed window and doors and windows are sealed properly, that's a focus point to sell and highlight, which could give you a bit more value in the sell price. So should they be putting that discussion through from the design stage at the start, or once it's in and just in addition with the builder?
Yeah, I think that the best thing that a homeowner can do before they start talking to anyone is have a really good think and get some clarity around what do they want for their home. How do they want it to perform? What kind of lifestyle do they want it to help them lead? And I feel like a lot of people jump into that process far too quickly of choosing the team members and letting that then guide and corral what they do. And so they don't ever take that time. So for me, it would always happen a design point of view, that conversation. You'll get a far more impactful result. For a lot of these things don't cost you anymore if you actually prioritize them up front. It's when people do try and bring them in the building stage, and they've designed an inefficient building because they didn't have that as part of their brief at the beginning, and then they're trying to make it efficient by, or perhaps what they do is they hit their need to get a building approval and their Energy Star rating, and they discover that they're not able to meet it, and so they're throwing in extra installation, and they're throwing in double glazing, and they're throwing in ceiling fans and all of these types of added measures, when if they'd actually had the design done right, they wouldn't have that extra cost at that point, So it is always worthwhile to take a lot of time before to really think about what you want for your home, and then to get the right team members on board who are going to help you to realise those and work with you collaboratively to realise what you want.
And in terms of those ratings that we find when we're going to buy appliances, like what do you trust? What do you do your research? How do people know they're legit? Are they, and who's endorsing them? If it is and even when we talk about Green Choice Australia and all these sorts of bodies that are making judgment on certain products and systems out there, who do you believe?
Yeah, well, as far as I'm aware, they are independently audited. For example, the Australian Window Association actually has a window energy rating scheme on its website that homeowners can access for free, and they can look at the performance, the thermal performance of windows against each other. So they can type in the manufacturer, the glazing type, the frame type, the thickness of the glass, if it's got any solar protection on it, all these types of things, and they can compare product to product. And the Australian Window Association members pay a fee to be part of that system, and it's all independently audited to make sure that there is integrity with that, with the way that information is presented. So yeah, I think that these things can be looked at and assessed and trusted, and I see lots of opportunity. The main thing is that homeowners need to realise they've got this within their power. I think that they relinquish their power far too soon in a process, and then they feel frustrated that they're not getting what they want. You as a homeowner are you are the key to making your project a success, because it's you who choose who you work with, it's you who choose who you pay and what you bring, the people that you bring on board. And so you being educated and informed about how you go about this process in the best way possible, that's going to be what unlocks what's possible for your home. So it's realizing you've got to be your home's best advocate and really stand up for what you want, and keep asking the questions if you don't think you're getting the right answers.
Information and knowledge. Amelia, thank you very much. Time is running out. There's a few more questions that we had from other customers, but we'll maybe get you back on a future program and go into those in more detail. It's been great having you on. Anyone who wants to check out Amelia, check out the Undercover Architect. There's blogs, there are podcasts, there's a whole lot of content that will give you value. And as we said earlier, it's worthwhile finding out that information, get as much as you can before you start, go in there more knowledgeable and prepared. Amelia, thank you for coming on the Reno Q&A Show. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me, Phil. It's been great.
Well, you heard it straight from Amelia, the Undercover Architect. Lots of good advice and thoughts there. If you've got any questions from what you heard today, please fire them our way. The email address is there now, or call our Monster crew. We're here to help you. Or get on monstershop.com and get to the go-to area. We've got our pros ready to help you with your next renovation or building. I'll see you on the next episode.